Hello, Mike here. Now, a few days ago, Anthropic launched the Model Context Protocol, a completely open source way to be able to connect clients that use generative capability to tools. Now, there's nothing particularly new about that. We've been able to do that for a while. But what this does is it standardizes that connection and allows tool makers to live over here and client makers to live over here. And it's completely open source, which means that you can use this protocol no matter which model you're using. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to create a client that uses different large language models, and we'll choose from a number of different large language models and use that to connect to the resource, the tool. Let's go a little bit into the architecture of how MCP works.
The MCP is the most efficient way of handling what we do.
And if you know where that's from, then comment below. So let's take a look at the overview of how MCP works. In this article that they published when they launched this, there are some links through to some resources. It also talks about the Claude desktop. Now, the reason why they talk about that is because if we go to the quickstart, which is linked just below in that article, this quickstart will step you through setting up like the first instance of MCP for you. And it uses the Claude desktop application as the client, and it sets up SQLite as the resource that you're going to connect to. So here's the architecture diagram. This is generally how MCP works. So we've got here the host. So in this particular quickstart example, that's going to be the Claude desktop. But in this video, that's going to be our application that we're going to write. And then in order to connect to these resources, we go through with this MCP server. And this is actually quite interesting. So somebody could create this server for you, and then your MCP compliant client can connect to it, because it's in this server that the definition exists for the tools that you can use to interact with this resource. So if you think about this before, if we were doing this by hand, if we were like making up an agent with tool usage, we'd be defining the way that the tool works actually inside of the code that we're writing our application in. So in other words, if it's a chatbot and the chatbot could connect to, I don't know, an API, then we would describe that and how that works in that application. But with this, what happens is that those definitions of those tools live inside of the MCP server. Now, I'd encourage you to step through this quick start guide just to get started. And then what we're going to do in the rest of the video is we're going to create our own client which uses the resources that were deployed here. This is the architecture of the quick start guide. So Claude Desktop, it talks to the SQLite MCP server, which will deploy on the machine. And it uses the MCP protocol to connect to that, although the P in MCP is protocol, so I don't really like that.
That MCP, that's half our problem right there.
But anyway, we'll just say the MCP. So it uses MCP to get to this server. That then will expose a bunch of tools, and it will announce to anybody who connects to it what tools it's got available. And then it'll perform those operations on this SQLite database. Now, this quick start guide will take you through how to do that on Windows or Mac. And the bit that I want to make sure you do from this is to deploy the SQLite database and just get their sample data that they've got here. Follow these instructions to create this. It just creates a simple SQLite database on your system. If you want to, but you don't have to, you can go through the rest of this configuration to actually connect up Claude Desktop if you've got that. But you don't actually need access to the Claude model in order to be able to follow along with the rest of this video, just if you want to do so. Just, it's worth noting how it works, even if we do it or not, and that's that we set up this configuration file that the Claude desktop application will use. And inside of that configuration file, we add this little configuration snippet here, with configuration of where the MCP server is. Now, the way that this current implementation of MCP works, it connects to standard input-output on your local machine. So it doesn't connect using a network connection. It just literally calls the application, the server, directly using standard input-output. So it uses something called UVX, which is called UVcorn. It was new to me when I started to look at this, but it's a Python package manager which allows you to be able to run Python projects, which is all packaged together. I'm not an expert, but what I do know is if you can say UVX and then pass in the package name and pass in some options, and that will be the server up and running. So this is the configuration we need. We're going to use basically the same thing in the application that we write as well. All right, I'll let you look through the rest of this quick start if you want. Once you've gone through this, you'll end up with a SQL database, a SQLite database on your machine. Now, I've got a SQLite Explorer here, so I can actually have a look at that file. You don't need to do this, but in this file, I've got one products table, and these are all the products. Okay, so with this, how can we go and create our own application? Remember this architecture here? Well, this is my version of this architecture. So I have an application that I've created. It uses the MCP to connect to an MCP server, which will connect to the database. But there's one piece missing from this diagram that was also missing from the diagram in the quick start guide. And that's, where's the LLM? Where's the large language model, which is powering the reasoning and thinking in the agentic workflow inside of my app? Well, I've got it hidden behind a white box. Here we go. So this is where it is. And obviously inside of the other one as well, the Claude desktop is reaching out to the Claude model. In my architecture here, my application is going to call out to the Bedrock Converse API from Amazon, the Amazon Bedrock Converse API. And it will then connect us to Amazon Bedrock to a big list of large language models. So the benefit of doing it this way is that my application can be configured to work with Converse API, and the Converse API takes one parameter to switch between one of a list of large language models that we can choose from. And by doing this, I can create this project that uses MCP, shows MCP in action, and we can show how we can create a client that could use Anthropic, but it could also use Mistral, or it could use Meta, and we will see that happening in the code. So let's jump over to the code and have a look. And so I've got one main file here, which is my app.py. This is really what does most of the things. There's some detail in here, and if you want to know more about some of the libraries that I'm using, then put a comment beneath this video and just let me know. Whilst you're doing that, why not give this video a like if you're enjoying it? Consider subscribing to this channel as well and clicking the bell notification so that you get notified when more videos like this come out. I'm here in Las Vegas, getting ready for reInvent 2024, which is just next week. So if you want to see more videos like this, then make sure you're subscribed. This is my Converse agent. It uses the Amazon Bedrock Converse API, but wraps up all of the other functions that we need, things like tool usage and then response processing and all that kind of stuff that you need to do an agentic workflow is handled for us inside of the Converse agent. We also have Converse tools.py. That's a tools manager class, which I use for my Converse agent to handle some of the undifferentiated heavy lifting of tool usage for that agent as well. And there are a couple of things that I've had to tweak in that library in order to get it to work here. I'll talk about those in just a sec. Let's stick at a high level then, and we'll take a look at this main.py. And so what we do is we define our model ID that we want to use. And at the moment, I'm going to use Claude 3.5 Sonnet version 2, very capable model, but we'll see here I've got some other models here waiting to go and to be tested as well. I'm going to get a copy of my Converse agent and my tool manager, which I'll load in as those tools. Again, if you want to know more about how that works, drop a comment below. Then we've got a system prompt here. So you're a helpful assistant that can use tools to help you answer questions and perform tasks. Nothing complex here, absolutely room for improvement if we want to dive a little bit deeper. Then I've got my standard input-output server parameters for the MCP server. And you'll notice that this is in the same format pretty much as we saw in the previous documentation for Quick Start when they were showing us how to work it with the Claude desktop. So you will need to make sure that you've got UVcorn installed. There's a requirements.txt there with everything that you need to install. So then async, everything's async about this library, about the MCP and the way it works. So I've had to become a little bit better at async than I was before. I'm not sure if I'm doing it perfectly here. Please let me know if you think there's a better way to do it. Maybe do a pull request into this repository. But yeah, lots of async here. I'm creating my MCP client. Now this is a wrapper that I've built around the MCP library, and I pass in those server parameters and get back an MCP client. So this is a wrapper that I've done here. It's pretty simple. Some parts of this are an attempt to help me deal with the async nature of how this works, but there's a connection here. It creates the connection using those server parameters and then sets up a session. And it's the session object, which really is what we're using for MCP. And once we've got the session, which is connected then to the server, we can do interesting things. So we can say, what tools do you have available? So connecting to that SQLite server, which is essentially a little thing running on my machine, you can ask it, what tools do you have? So that's an important architectural setup of the way this works. We don't define the tools. We call the tools from the server endpoint. And then we can call the tool. So we can call get tools, get a big long list of them, register them with our agent, and then the agent can call the tool when it needs. So that's basically all I've done in this object here. So let's go back. So I call get available tools, I get my tools, I iterate through them, and I load them into my agent. So loading the name and the description. It's interesting here, and probably not much of a coincidence, that the Converse API, the payload for the tool definition, is exactly the same as the definition that we have inside of MCP. So that's a time saver. Okay, so once all the tools are loaded in, we then enter into this simple chatbot. It's essentially a command line chatbot. We say, enter your prompt, and then when you enter in a piece of text, we call invoke with prompt. We call the agent, we invoke the agent. And that's all we have to do, because then the agent deals with the agentic workflow of tool usage and doing all of that stuff. And as far as the agent's concerned, it doesn't really need to know specifically that it's using MCP here. MCP has been used to set the agent up so that it knows about the tool definition. Now, it's probably important to point out at this point that MCP is more than just tool usage. It's also got things like resources, there's some sort of callback mechanism, there are other things in there too. But I think tool usage is the most basic usage, it's the most basic element, and that's what we're looking at in this video. All right, so we've got all that, so we just have to press run. Now we're currently using the Claude 3.5, so let's press run there. That's gotten a bit big, hasn't it? And we should have, enter your prompt. So let's ask a question and see if it'll use the tools to go and interrogate the database. So how many products, let's spell it right, shall we, are in the products table? Simple question, and I know it will be able to answer this, but let's see it work. And it has worked. Now, there's a bit of a trace here, so it says there are 20 products in the product table. Quickly go back. Yes, there are 20 products in the product table. But let's have a little look at what it did just then. So it took my input question, which is great, and it then, the assistant got back and said, okay, I'll help you count the number of products in the products table using a select query, it just says underneath there, and it's come back with tool usage and the name of the tool, and then the input for that, which is a SQL string. Now, we didn't define any of that, all of that schema for how to use that tool, and in fact, the fact that the tool even existed was actually defined by the server. Now, in this particular case, the server is provided for us by Anthropic, but you could make your own servers and you could use servers from other people as well. So that's what's pretty exciting about this. Now, one thing to note here, this actually technically is not the name of this tool. The tool definitions that come from the server happen to have hyphens, so it's read hyphen query, but the tool definition in the Converse API isn't compatible with hyphens. So I had to do an on-the-fly convert to a underscore, and then the actual tools, here we go. So if I go to here with my Converse tool manager, there is actually a piece in here which comes up with a sanitized name, and it keeps track of it for us. So it maps it to a name that the model can deal with, or the Converse API can deal with, and then it transparently flips it back again. So that's one of the changes that I had to make to this library in order to make it work. But it works, and neither party is aware of this. It doesn't really matter. The LLM thinks it's got an underscore. The tool knows that it doesn't. The library deals with the intermediary. Anyway, so it's done that. It's read the query. We then come back with the user response, the tool result. There we have product count of 20, and you can see agentic workflow. There are 20 products in the table, and that's what it comes back with and says. So that's it. It works. Fantastic. Well, let's prove the point then that if I exit this and let's just get rid of this, let's go back into the code here, and we'll swap out the model for a different one. So we're going to swap out the model now for Mistral Large 2, actually. So I can choose any of the models which are compatible with the Converse API, which are inside of Amazon Bedrock. So let's save that and run that. And well, let's see what happens now. And it should be that it just works the same way. So let's ask for something different. Create a weather table with some sample observations, something like that. Let's have a look. So yeah, it looks like it's creating a table. No, it's not. It's looked at what tables it has. This is interesting. I wonder what it's doing here. Let's have a look. Let's get to the end. And okay, table created and sample weather observations inserted successfully. And it says it's done it. Let's go over to our database. And I'm just going to click refresh here. And yeah, indeed, I have a weather table, and there I have some weather observations. So it's worked. Fantastic. One more model to test. Let's just prove the point. I'm sure you probably have no doubts that this will work, and neither do I. But let's do it anyway. Let's hook it up to Meta's Llama 3.2, the 90 billion parameter model. I'll save that, run it again. And that's all we have to do is just make that one line of configuration change to change the model ID identifier, and off we go. How many weather observations do we have? See if it can get there. Now there's a lot of scope here to change some of the system prompt to make it more accurate, but in this particular case, it's worked totally fine. We have 3 weather observations. It's gotten it right. Okay, just before we finish up, I just want to show you one thing which I haven't quite got working yet. And maybe if you can figure out why it's not working, you can help me out and you can help us all out by fixing this up. Let's go back to the Claude model, and once we've got that, let's save that. As part of this, one of the tools which is actually registered is an insights tool. So it's not actually for querying the SQL database, and it's just a tool which Anthropic have decided to put into this little server that they created. It's an insights tool, so if you ask for some analysis of the data, it will update this memo with those insights. And it seems to work okay on the Claude desktop, but I haven't managed to get it working here. So the memo is a resource, not a tool, but the tool should be able to use the resource. And for some reason, I'm not getting these things to line up. Let me show you what I mean. If I press run, then we get back in here. If I say, what is the average cost of a product, then it should go into the product table, and it should be able to do this, right? It's not complicated, and indeed it does do it. Let's have a see once it's gone through its agentic workflow here. Okay, so it's got to this point here, and you can see it says the average product price in the inventory is $82.14, which provides a baseline for pricing analysis and inventory value assessment. Sure, I'm sure it does. What it's doing here is it's calling tool use append insights. And this is the only tool that I've seen inside of this MCP server, which will interact with this memo resource. And you can see, well, that's basically what it's trying to do. And if you look at the documentation, append insight does exactly that. It should be appending this to that memo resource. But for some reason, it doesn't do it. It hangs here. It never finishes.
End of line.
What I've done is shown that we've been able to use MCP, so the Model Context Protocol, which is open source from Anthropic, but we can use it with any large language model that we can support an agentic workflow with to connect through to this tool, as long as your client is set up to support the MCP protocol, if we're going to say MCP protocol. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do give it a like if you enjoyed it. Consider subscribing to this channel and pressing the bell notification. Like I said, I'm at reInvent at the moment, so there should be lots more videos like this coming out this week. And until the next time, I'll see you in the next video.